Today's daf is daf Yud Daled, and Amir Hashem will finish up Horiyos and begin Zvachim. So we're on the bottom now of Yud Gimel and Beis where we left off, and Omar Divrei Chalomos Lo Mailim V'Lo Moridin. So Rabbi Meir was involved in a kind of confrontation with Rav Shimon Gamliel, and in a dream appeared to him that he should try to make amends with Rav Shimon Gamliel, but Rabbi Meir didn't pay attention to dreams. And he was the Chacham, and he wanted to fool or trick Rabbi Gamliel with Uktzin in order to depose him. There was Rabbi Nassan, who was the Av Bezdin. He accepted the dream and went back to appease Reb Shimon. And Rabbi Nassan Azal, Rabbi Meir lo Azal. Omar divrei chalomos lo mailim v'lo moridim. Ki Azal Rabbi Nassan, Omar lehu Reb Shimon Gamliel. When he asked, in a sense, Mechila, Rabbi Nassan from Rabbi Gamliel said to him, Nehi, tiahani loch kamra diavuch, lemehevi av bezdin, shavina nami nasi. Okay, fine. Your father had this golden belt that reflected the fact that he was the av bezdin. Now you inherited his position, but you want to go beyond that and you want to be the nasi? Meaning, implying that he doesn't deserve to be the nasi. Masni leila Rabbi Shimon Bray. Now, Rebbe is teaching his son, Rabbi Shimon, and he quotes a Mishnah in Bechoros that says, Acherim Omrim. So Rabbi Meir is not called by his name, but rather called by Acherim. And this is apparently after the death of Rabbi Meir, and you would think that at some point Rebbe could institute or re-establish Rabbi Meir as Rabbi Meir and quote him by name. But he doesn't. He quotes him at the name of Acherim, which was the Gzeira of Rav Shimon ben Gamliel. Now, what does Rabbi Meir say in Masechta Bechoros? So this has to do with something called Maser Behema. So they took all the animals and they would, one by one, let them out of the pen, out of the corral, counting 1, 2, 3. And when they got to the 10th, they designated it as Maser Behema, which has to be brought on the Mizbeach. But as we'll soon see, Maser Behema doesn't have the same level of Kedusha like Shlomim, which is Kodshim Kalim. It's even below Shlomim on the hierarchy. So many of the dinim that would apply to Shlomim would not apply to Maser Behema. Like, for example, Smicha, and soon we'll see Tmura. In any event, let's just try to summarize before we start today's daf, the Mishnah in Bechoros that deals with Maser Behema. So what happened is he's counting, and he mistakenly, when he gets to the 9th animal that's about to leave, he declares it as the 10th. And then later on, when he gets to the 11th hour, the 11th animal, he sort of like catches on to his mistake, and he counts the 11th animal as the 10th. So the Mishnah establishes that all 3 animals have a certain level of Kedusha, different levels. The 10th is actually Maser Behema, even though he didn't count it as the 10th, he counted the 9th as the 10th. But that animal has the full-fledged Kedusha of Maser Behema, has to be brought on the Mizbeach, and no one's allowed to eat the basar. Even if it becomes a balmum, you'd have to do a process of pidyon. The 9th, which is really not Maser, but because he declared it as the 10th mistakenly, therefore it gets a certain level of Kedusha. It's not a full-fledged Maser Behema, And let's say if there's a mum, then you could eat the basar and so forth. The 11th, on the other hand, would also have a certain level of kedusha because he mistakenly thought that the 11th was the 10th. Now, ilu haya tmura, and now we start today's daf, lo haya karev. Now let's understand. When you say tmura and you say that this animal should be tmuras, it should be a replacement for this animal, which is hegdesh. If the original is shlomim, then the tmura takes on certain dinim of shlomim. And the tmura substitute animal, again, it doesn't affect the original animal, but the tmura substitute animal gets certain dinim of shlomim. However, in the case of maser behema, there is no tmura. So if you would be memir this animal onto maser behema, this animal would not gain any dinim of tmura, has no dinim whatsoever. And that's because although shlomim is on a higher level, kadshei kalim, than maser behema, but maser behema is on a lower level and it cannot create tmura. And therefore, in that Mishnah in Bechoros, a controversy is recorded between Rabbi Meir and Rabbi Yehuda. Rabbi Yehuda is of the opinion that if you were to be memir on the 11th animal, then that tmura would not be chal. Now, in order to appreciate Rabbi Yehuda, we have to understand Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir is a little bit more intuitive. Rabbi Meir says that since the 11th animal is now being granted the status of shlomim, therefore, if you would be memir on the 11th animal, you're being memir on shlomim. You're not being memir on maser behema. Whereas Rabbi Yehuda holds that the 11th animal is kind of like a substitute for the 10th animal. And therefore it has the halacha of maser behema, and therefore there's no tmura. In any event, lo haya karev, right? So that according to Rabbi Yehuda, according to Rabbi Meir's argument against Rabbi Yehuda would have to say that since the 11th animal is called tmura because it itself is a substitute for the 10th animal, it is not the 10th animal, therefore it cannot create a tmura because there's no tmura on maser behema. I'm sorry, let me say even better than that. There's no tmura onto tmura. You can't make a tmura on a tmura. The 11th animal, according to Rabbi Yehuda, it's itself a tmura. Whereas according to Rabbi Meir, the kedusha of the 11th animal is that of shlomim, and shlomim does create tmura. And therefore, the tmura of the shlomim on the 11th animal, which is called shlomim, would have to be brought on the mizbeach. According to Rabbi Yehuda, on the other hand, lo haya karev. Amar lo. So Rabbi Shimon turns to his father with all due respect, and he says, Mihem halolu. This sheet of acherim, so-called anonymous others, is a brilliant shita. Me'em anushosim, we really drink their water. They are teaching us. And he's trying to convey to his father the message that Rabbi Meir is the source for Torah. Ushmosam einon maskirin, you can't mention his name? We have a very basic principle that a Omer Dover B'Shem Omer, you have to mention the name of someone. And here is someone from whom we drink the waters of Torah and wisdom, and now you can't mention his name, Omer Le. You know what? My son, Rabbi Shimon, don't you realize that B'nai Adam shebikshu lakar kvodcha kvod beis avicha? Do you realize who you're talking about? You're talking about someone who wanted to completely undermine the respect and the status of our father, and you're talking about Rav Shimon Gamliel, the Nasi, and he wanted to embarrass him and then dispose him. How can we mention his name? Omolei. So the son again, respectfully responds to his father, Rebbe, and he says, well, let's take a look at a pasuk in Kohelet. Shlomo Melech says, "Gam ahavtem, gam sinasam, gam kinasam, kvar ovda." After a person has died already, there's no longer room for hate, for jealousy. We have to assume that whatever Rabbi Meir did in his lifetime, he did. He wasn't justified, was justified, but now he's gone. Let's drop all the jealousy and the hatred, leave it behind. So now Rebbe, the father, retorts with another pasuk from Tehillim, Ha'oyev tamu charovos lanetzach, which literally means that although they have died, they're still enemies and their ruins remain forever. In other words, they have an impact that continues for all of posterity. Amalei, Rabbi Shimon once again respectfully responds, Hani mili heicha dahanu masayu. You would be right, Tati, if their actions that they precipitated during their lifetime would still be impacted, but there is no impact. Rabbi Shimon Gamliel was and continued even after Rabbi Meir's attempt to undo him, continues as the Nasi. Rabbanan lo ahanu masayu. In other words, the deeds of Rabbi Nosson and Rabbi Meir didn't have any impact. So now that they're gone, we could reinstate them. Hadar Asnili. Apparently, Rebbe, the father, broke down, softened his stance, and accepted what his son said. And he changed the Mishnah itself, because Rebbe was the final editor of the Mishnah, and he writes, Omru Mishum Rabbi Meir, Ilu Hayatmur, etc., Amar Rava at a later generation points out that Rebbe did not fully reinstitute Rabbi Meir and accept his son Rabbi Shimon's argument, because Afilu Rebbe Dad Vanasahu, despite the fact that Rebbe was the paradigm of Anova, of humility, nevertheless, Tana Amru Mishum Rabbi Meir. When he re-edited the Mishnah, he didn't say Amar Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Meir used to teach us the following. That he didn't say. He said, they said in the name of Rabbi Meir. That's kind of like, by the by. So he didn't really fully re-accept Rabbi Meir. Rabbi Yochanan, Pligu Bar Rabbi Shimon Gamliel Rabbanan, Chad Omar Sinai Adif, Chad Omar Oker Harim Adif. Who should be the choice candidate to be the leader of Klal Yisrael, the big Rosh Hashiva? Should it be Sinai? Sinai are those who has an expert knowledge of all the Mishnayos, all the Braisos. That level of yediyah, of knowledge, of scholarship is called Sinai. But what about Oker Harim? You might have someone who doesn't have the same broad knowledge, but yet he can proverbially uproot mountains, meaning his power of analysis and dissection of the highest intellectual level, that should be preferable. And Rabbi Yochanan says that this is the subject of Machlokas Tanon. Now the Gemara wants to give an example of who should be the leader of Klal Yisrael between Oker Harim and Sinai. Rav Yosef Sinai. Rav Yosef was a paradigm of Sinai, tremendously broad knowledge. Rab, on the other hand, was an Oker Harim. As we said before, he had that uncanny ability of dissecting, of getting down to the bottom of it, to the heart of the matter. Sholchu l'Taman, a message was sent from Eretz Yisrael to ask Eze Mehem Kodeh. There were two possible candidates to take over the leadership in Bavel. It could either be that they would appoint Rav Yosef as Rosh Shiva or Rabbah. They would either appoint the Sinai or The Oker Haran, Sholchulahu, the reply was sent that certainly Sinai Adif. That means that the one who should really take over should be Rav Yosef. The Omar Mar, because we have a statement, I called Tzrichim Lamari, this is Gemara Babasa, I called Tzrichim Lamari Dechiti. We all need the owner of the wheat. The owner of the wheat is called Sinai. He's the one who has all the wheat to offer us that we need to buy in order to make bread. He has all the information that we'll need in the storehouse of his mind, all the Chachma and all the Torah in order to paskin halachas. But even despite the fact that the message was clear, that the real proper candidate to take over the yeshiva would be Rav Yosef, but nevertheless, Lo kibel Rav Yosef alai. Rav Yosef did not want to accept the position. And therefore, who took over? Rabbah took over. Now, there are a number of different possibilities as to why Rav Yosef refused and turned it down. One of them is because Rav Yosef had some sort of Ruach HaKodesh that he would die prematurely as the Rosh Hashiva. So he figured, let Rabbah be the Rosh Hashiva and I'll be able to live a lot longer. Others say that Rav Yosef wanted to focus on his own learning, his own creativity, and he didn't want to be bothered to be, the Rosh. Molach Rabbah Esrim V'Tartin Shnin. Rabbah lived as the Rosh Hashiva for 22 years. That gave Rav Yosef another extend his life by 22 years. And then Rabbah died. Hadar Molach Rav Yosef. And then Rav Yosef became the head of the yeshiva, and he only lasted for 2.5 years, and then he died. Kol Shnei D'Molach Rabbah, Rav Yosef afilu umnad lebeisei lo cholf. Rav Yosef wanted to avoid, during the 22 years that Rabbah ruled the yeshiva, any sort of indication that Rav Yosef, would paskin shilas. That wouldn't be right. So therefore, even when it came to kavod that they wanted to give him, for example, in those days, bloodletting was part of, whether it was once a week or a couple of times a week, part of the routine. And you would have to go to the bloodletter, but in the case of a chacham, the bloodletter, out of respect for the chacham, would come to the house. He would do what we call a house call. You remember those days when doctors used to do house calls? Oh, you're dating yourself. Anyway, so during this period of time, 22 years, Rabbah rules the academy. Rav Yosef would not invite the bloodletter to come into his house, even though Rav Yosef, deserved to be the Rosh Hashiva, but rather, and here we have two possibilities, either he went to see the bloodletter or the bloodletter came to Rabbah's house, and that's where it took place. Abai v'Rabbah, Rav Zera, Rav Mamsos Haviyasvi, all these chacham were sitting together, Vavitzrichi Reishi. They needed to appoint the leader of the generation. Amongst them was Abaye and Rava. Amri, they decided, like instead of flipping the coin amongst these four great scholars, called the Omer Milsa v'lo mafrich, anyone who could make a presentation in halacha that is so cogent that none of the other rabbis can refute it, lehavi b'reisha, he should be reisha, and dekulu, but all of them, with the exception of Abaye, ifrach, whatever teachings they got, they were slugged up. But the Abaye lo ifrach. No one could refute Abaye. His logic was so solid. Chazi Raval Abaye de Govareshe. In other words, at that point, when no one could refute Abaye, Abaye's head sort of popped up, as if to say, then I should, I guess, have this elevated status. And when Rava saw Abaye's head stand up, he understood that this was a sign from Shamayim that indeed Abaye deserved to be appointed as the head of the academy. Amalei, and Rava said to Abaye, Nachmeni, right, the appellation for Rabbi was Nachameni because he was born without parents, so they wanted to give him a Nachama. Psach v'ema. Begin to deliver your discourses in front of the yeshiva. You are the Rosh. Iboilahu. The Gemara raises the following suffix. Rabbi Zev of Rabbi Bar Masasa Haiminayot. Here are two great scholars. Which of them should be appointed to head up the yeshiva? On the one hand, Rabbi Zera Charif Umakshe. Rabbi Zera has this capacity of being very on top of the logical structure of the halacha. He could cut it with a sharp razor. And not only that, he would be able to raise all the kashas, all the pirchas, and difficulties on the sugya. But Rabbi Barba Masna, Masun. Masun means he was very slow, very patient. He would look it over slowly, analyzing it from every perspective, turning it inside out, upside down. Umasik, and as opposed to Reb Zera, who never really came to any definite conclusions, because anything you told him, he would slug it up. He, Rabba Bar Masna, came to conclusions that he paskin my. Which approach is superior? Who should be appointed as the head? Take Hadron Alecha Koin Moshiach Uslika Le Maseches Horiyos. So now we begin Be'ezer Hashem Masechtas Zva. So we begin Kodshim, Seder Kodshim, which means if we finish Kodshim, then we just have Taros left. In Daf Yomi, there's not much of Taros. There's just Nida, which is enough of an undertaking. I'm not looking forward to it. But what's nice about Zvachim is that it's sort of a little bit of an easier way of jumping into this new world of Kodshim, which most of us are not very, very familiar with. Not to say that Zvachim is easy, it certainly is not.